march to the sound of thunder. Taurian banners raised high asunder. Steel on steel, you hear the echoes roar. Good times rhymes with war crimes evermore. Get off our lawn, Starling scum, we stand as one. You'd better run, paws of fury, hearts ablaze. War pugs thunder through the haze. From dusty plains to the jagged peaks, we guard our home through fire and sleet. No Concordat will kneel or bow. Our cause is just, our time is now. Get off our lawn, Starling scum, we stand as one. You'd better run, paws of fury, hearts ablaze. War pugs thunder through the haze. We're snarling thunder, relentless charge. Our anthem shakes the void at large. Bulldogs of justice, sharp and bold. Our legacies forged in myths untold. We howl for freedom, we rage for peace. Our battle cries will never cease. The war pugs rise, unstoppable tide. Together we conquer, side by side.
War Pugs.
Get off our lawn, Starling scum, we stand as one. You'd better run, paws of fury, hearts ablaze. War pugs thunder through the haze. Woo! Thunder haze.
Guys! I hope everybody's had a good day so far. Guys, thank you guys so much. Thank you guys so much, because I was able to go on a vacation for the first time in a very, very long time. It's been at least a decade since I have stepped away completely from everything and actually sat back and did nothing. I can tell you guys, like, a lot of people were wondering, what are you going to do on your vacation? What are you going to do for the week that you're gone? What are you going to be doing? And for me, normally when I go on vacation, I am going, vacation. I'm going with someone else, and then I turn into a whole bunch of, it's just, I'm running people around places, stuff like that. It is what it is. It is what it is. But this time, I went on my type of vacation, which means I sat back with my mother and father, hung out with my brother a little while, and did practically nothing. I enjoyed several days of just rest and relaxation, and it was actually very, very nice. I haven't done it in such a long time. It's actually been too long, actually, since I've done that, because I'm always, even when I've taken days off work, I'm working. as far as my 9 to 5. As far as doing that, I'm working still. Even when, I've taken days off here, I've been doing stuff around the house. So it was something else to wake up every single day. And it's just like, what am I doing today? Nothing. I'm doing nothing today. I'm sitting down, talking with my mother, which I have not had a chance to do for years. The same thing with my father. And getting to visit my brother, which was awesome. Seeing what's going on with him. But now, we're back. Now, we are jumping back in with the Taurians. This is the false dawn. It's going to be sad. We all know that. Now, I don't have that long tonight to live stream. I did want to come back and jump in, say hey, see how everybody was doing. Black Wolf, the kids say hi. Paisley is excited for Saturday because it's celebrating her 3rd birthday this weekend. All right. Ah, little one. Ah, that's so nice. That's great. That's absolutely fantastic. Oh, happy birthday, Paisley. I don't know if I have to do something for that or not. But, guys, we're going to jump into this. Glory to House Merrick. Big Red released an alternate timeline of the clan invasion. I always like watching alternate timelines of stuff. I always love that. I love that kind of stuff. You just finished watching Serenity the movie? Alan, I have not seen that at all. How was it? Guys, let's get into it. For as much as I can do tonight, Battletech Tuesday will resume its regularly scheduled Carnage and War Crimes next Tuesday. But, guys, let's get into it.
As we emerge into the living era of Battletech, the beginning of when history truly starts to move forwards, I wanted to give everyone some perspective. One thing I think the Taurian Concordat and its long, almost 1,000-year history can teach us is that states can change over time, or they can even be lost.
True.
But they respond to the world around them, and they respond to the needs of the people within them. Sometimes, sacred ideas are reinforced, and other times, they are sacrificed.
True.
The Taurian Concordat is a little different than its house counterparts in this respect, as they too change with the currents of history and the demands of the day. A new dawn had begun in the outer reaches of human space in the 29th and 30th centuries with the arrival of a new ideology and the people motivated by it.
Yay!
This political movement was called the Farlookers, and while they existed across the surviving periphery realms, they were centered most in the Taurian Concordat. These Farlookers, seeing the future of mankind not in where it'd been, but in where it could go, focused their efforts on exploration and finding new frontiers, just as their ancestors had.
I think I'm gonna like these guys.
With their influence within the Concordat growing, and with the Taurian state attempting to expand without conflict with its neighbors, it was a match made in heaven.
Hey, Mitch!
New worlds were settled across their near abroad, and exploration vessels dove into the expanse beyond humanity's limited realm. Many of these small settlements didn't have the necessary technologies, people, or support to persist, but some did. Few, if any, of these worlds appear on most star maps, but there is indeed a network of these sparse outposts, sometimes with only a few thousand people living on them, spread out across the darkness of space near the Concordat. Many don't even appear on star charts. By the turn of the 31st century, to some of the more keen-eyed people in Comstar, the Taurians had been building themselves up into the potential next great house. The Concordat had consistent population growth, both through their own citizenry naturally expanding, but also through consistent waves of newcomers from the inner sphere. Sometimes people were running from something in their personal lives, or they just wanted to start somewhere fresh and new. And these became a consistent influx into the relatively stable, secure, and prosperous Concordat.
Okay.
More importantly, the Taurians of this age, and ages prior, showed their willingness to accept refugees at face value, even if problems became associated with it from time to time. These newcomers found their way into the established worlds of the Concordat, or they joined the ranks of the Farlookers, bounding out to the web of undisclosed colonies along the border.
Alan.
Despite how hard living could be in the periphery, even in the Taurian state, for much of its history they never turned away people fleeing from the inner sphere. Not purely for shallow reasons like population growth,
Of course
or
not.
for insights into events or new technologies from the inner sphere, but because that was where the Taurians themselves came from. Under Calderon, who incentivized the Farlookers and colonist projects through tax incentives and subsidies, this began to boom. When factoring in the culture of people seeking new lives even further from the dangers of the inner sphere, and following in the spirit of finding new challenges, this really could create a true superpower over the course of another century or two, as the Concordat's population and borders grew, and this would result in something new and powerful coming into being. This, however, was tragically not to be their destiny. Thomas Calderon was declared...
Okay, look, I'm gonna say it. I'm just gonna say it. I don't even need to see anything other than this picture to know this guy's a douchebag. I don't really need anything else. This is going to be hell on wheels.
Protector in 3017, after the death of his mother Calderon, and this was truthfully the beginnings of a disaster.
Of course.
Thomas was not the patient, long-term planner that his mother was.
Right.
And he was far more militant in his stances towards everything.
Sweet.
His first major challenge involved the rising of a power between the Taurian Concordat, the Magistracy of Canopus, and the Capellan Confederation, known as the Aurigan Coalition. The Aurigans had restored some prosperity to the independent worlds upon its emergence and expansion over the 30th century. Unrecognized by most major powers, this small collection of worlds were abandoned leftovers from the Concordat and Capellan Confederation dating back to the days of the Star League, or even into the Age of War. Now united into their own state, they added stability to this fragile region, allowing for growth and some measure of prosperity to emerge.
I got a feeling he's going to declare war on it.
The problem was, while the Concordat had long ago abandoned its garrisons and recalled its governors from this once contested region of space, most of it was still officially claimed by the Taurian Concordat as their worlds. Many of these planets even bordered with the Concordat's more established outposts, so their security concerns and claims, despite not being pressed for decades, did have some air of validity about them. During the time that the Coalition had evolved out of a trade pact in the area, and while it was in this significantly less developed form, the Taurians did not pay attention to the region. However, now with the Aurigans formed into a proper state, and with new worlds joining them, and with the aggressive Thomas Calderon at the head of the Concordat, things were on a course for a potentially disastrous outcome.
Yay.
To head off issues on the horizon, Taurian diplomats met with coalition representatives on Cormadir, the Aurigan capital. Though, dismally, negotiations derailed and devolved rapidly, ending up worse than nowhere. In fact, this meeting was such a disaster on the Aurigan side that it caused a massive fissure in their own government.
Oh.
Fate would have it, however, that Tamati Arano, the High Lord of the Reach, would be killed in a tragic jumpship incident, largely due to a failing and ill-maintained KF drive. Before his daughter, Camilla, could fully ascend to replace him, Lord Santiago Espinosa opted to use his support base to overthrow the government and establish the Aurigan Directorate. Camilla, his niece, was assumed killed in the coup. This new junta, quietly, had a great deal to do with Taurus, and it made sense. The clear intention was for the Directorate to orbit the Taurians' interests. Unfortunately, the fog of war appears to have had consequences taking shape in the form of a series of major miscalculations on behalf of the conspirators, such as Camilla surviving the coup and returning to restore the Reach's coalition. Covertly at first, the Taurians provided weapon shipments to the Directorate against the uprising, until the death of Captain Samuel Ostegard II and the destruction of his Union dropship, one which had feigned being a civilian vessel. This was used as
I actually have that game. I just haven't been able to play it that much. Man, I just really have not been able to play it that much. I was talking a little bit earlier about this. I have a lot of games that I just have not been able to play, and I'm thinking about doing something about that in the near future, but we'll find out.
justification for the Concordat to directly enter the war, and it was decided that Commodore Samuel Ostegard, the father of the slain captain, and his fortress-class dropship, the Iberia, would be used as the spearhead of the expedition, along with a full battalion of heavily armed battle mechs. They tore through the Aurigan Reach, annihilating Camilla's forces and even wiping out historic noble ruling houses across the region.
Great.
After the destruction of the Iberia and the death of Ostegard, whose demise helped cause a mini ice age over Cormadir due to the destruction of his dropship, and with parts of the Taurian government's prior involvement being exposed, the Concordat abandoned the Directorate to their fate by the end of 3022. This was the first major local diplomatic event that Thomas Calderon oversaw. The pattern was set. On the home front of his reign, outside of the disastrous destabilization and
So basically what he's saying is the word of the day is going to be trend.
eventual destruction of the Aurigan state due to his meddling, Thomas Calderon, in fear of an impending Davian invasion at the onset of the Fourth Succession War, ended all tax benefits to colonists and colonization organizations that had been working across the Taurian frontier in order to increase the military budget. This was nothing short of robbing the future of the prosperity of the Taurian state in order to fund military expenditures at that moment.
Right.
And things only became progressively worse from here. While this did have broad support at home at first, many were still weary that things could drag on for far too long. Those voices would be proven right.
Oh, yay.
After the conclusion of the Fourth Succession War, with the Federated Commonwealth winning conclusively over the Captian Accord, the military spending and paranoia by the Protector was not alleviated. The military was kept on high alert as Thomas Calderon was convinced that the Davians would pour over the border if they saw a moment of weakness.
Which they probably would have, to be perfectly honest with you, if they weren't getting their, you guys know where I'm going with that. You guys know exactly where I'm going at that. I'm just saying, one bad egg nearly killed the Concordat. Yeah, no kidding. It's sounding like it's gonna be great. Yelwin, it was awesome, my guy. Chillin' was really nice. Yeah.
Especially after how they dispatched the Capellan Confederation with such ease. Huge funds were spent on aerospace fighters as that wing of the military had atrophied after the breakup of the Star League. And this was done with the aid of contractors and advisors from the Outworlds Alliance, their former comrades in the resistance to the Star League from another portion of the periphery. But as the years went on and no invasion came, the Taurian citizenry, who at first by and large supported these policies, became increasingly resentful of their taxes being funneled into the never-ending well of the war machine, as well as towards foreign advisors. Even piracy ceased being properly handled, ironically, despite the increase in military spending, as the Taurians were forbidden from pursuing them outside of their own borders, as Thomas Calderon felt if any meaningful portion of the TDF left Taurian space, it could spell disaster, as the Federated Commonwealth may jump on that weakness. And things only became worse from here. Edward Calderon, the heir...
It sounds very Cretan of him to sit there and have paranoid delusions about a random possible force.
Heir and eldest son to Thomas Calderon, as well as one of his most trusted advisors, died in a tragic dropship accident in 3034. Considered a fair-minded and dutiful man, the Concordat mourned the protector that they'd never have, especially those who wanted to open trade with the Federated Commonwealth, as Edward had been a quiet proponent of this, hoping to see real change when he came into office. Janice Calderon, only a teenager upon her brother's death, became the next heir apparent, and toured the Protectorate after assuming the role officially, doing her best to understand her people's needs. Her personality, vitality, and sober acceptance of responsibility earned her a great deal of popularity and trust amongst the common people.
She's gonna die.
With the tragedy of Edward's loss, some within the government and inside the higher echelons of society began to take measures into their own hands. Farlooker sympathizers within the Ministry of Trade and Colonization drafted a bill that authorized the creation of a trust fund for research and development of improved aerospace technologies, claiming it would be used for the TDF. This was a front, and instead the funds were controlled by Lauren Mackenzie, an auditor for the Ministry of Trade. These funds were then channeled into renewed, but private, in order to make things harder to track, colonization efforts.
Oh, yay.
Revitalizing a major component of the Taurian economy, and doing so in the Protector's blind spot. 16 worlds were colonized as a result of this intrigue between 3035 and 3037. The Protector, sadly, discovered this embezzlement and took swift action against the people trying to sustain the economy and vitality of the state. Every member of the Ministry of Trade and Colonization was arrested, and their assets were seized, even those who took no part in it. Thomas saw nothing but treason now within the entire organization. They played a role by their silence. Paranoia ruled the day, and upon Catherine Calderon's intervention, the wife of Thomas Calderon, did Thomas release those who hadn't been found directly guilty, and restored their assets. Anyone now in the government, however, feared what the Protector could do, with even the smallest hint of treason. Very much, the ideals of Ignatius Calderon were not embodied in his descendant. What's worse was just when the Concordat needed stability and certainty as to what the world would look like after the troubled Thomas Calderon, another calamity struck.
I told you she was gonna die.
Janice Calderon became sick with the Brisbane virus, robbing her of the ability to be the official heir, as she was confined to a wheelchair as her body degenerated. Ian Calderon, the next in line, abandoned the state to become a mercenary, washing his hands of the entire situation. Felix, the fourth of 5 children, and a little-known, very private person, was now next in line to be protector of the Concordat. He'd wanted to be an explorer and despised the idea of governing, but took on the role as heir. As Edward was dead, Janice was unable, and Ian had shirked his responsibilities.
Right.
Still, before he could ever even hope to become the Protector in full, he had not given up on his love of exploring the cosmos. In 3046, his jump ship disappeared while delving into the depths of unexplored space.
Hooray.
Some claim he fled, hoping, much like Ian, to escape his duties. But such disappearances tend to be more associated with critical failures of jump vessels, or with violent interactions with pirates, than they are with people following their dreams to explore forever.
Dora the Explorer, the real game.
Only Geoffrey Calderon now remained. A young man of only 20 years old, he was now the last member of House Calderon who could, without dispute, inherit the protectorship.
Joy.
Yet more tragically, in 3047, there was a minor border incident where a freighter registered to the Federated Commonwealth misjumped into Taurian space. This mistake cost the crew their lives as their jump ship was destroyed by jittery Taurian pilots. However, the incident report did go up the chain of command and ended up on the desk of the now old, paranoid, and isolated Thomas Calderon.
Hooray!
The entire military was put on high alert for an immediate invasion by the armed forces of the Federated Commonwealth. As the military was on red alert, months into the crisis, Dedrick's Devils, a mercenary unit working for the Federated Commonwealth, went rogue after a payment dispute with House Steiner Davian, and jumped into the Pinard system, inside of the Taurian Concordat.
Oh.
Without knowing why the mercenaries were there, they refused the Devils the right to land and resupply. And as a result, The mercenaries raided Penard's capital,
Of
before
course.
diving further into the periphery beyond the Concordat. This only further entrenched the Protector's wild vision of the Federated Commonwealth, seeking to crush the Concordat, as it had crushed the Capellan Confederation
Right,
only
dear.
a few decades prior. In response, in 3048, he knew he needed as much intelligence as possible. Thomas authorized numerous recon missions into the Federated Sun's half of the Commonwealth, resulting in multiple border skirmishes and small-scale battles.
Typically, this is what's referred to as a self-fulfilling prophecy. This is typically what is referred to as a self-fulfilling prophecy.
But the broader invasion never materialized. Though, in 3049, a meaningfully large military exercise known as Victor 49 was launched near the Concordat's borders. This set Calderon off, as he saw that the big one had finally come. Declaring a state of emergency, he forced Taurian citizens into constructing planetary defenses across the seemingly sieged kingdom. The dam finally broke, as the citizens of the Concordat had finally had enough.
Yeah.
They had had enough of the waste of their taxes. They had had enough of now being conscripted into a fantasy invasion. Widespread protests broke out, but Thomas had insisted that the threat was real, and remained unrelenting in his policies. Only with the arrival of the clans did the Federated Commonwealth Task Force depart, which made Calderon look all the more the fool. Though, if the task force had been there to invade, only the arrival of the clans had stopped them.
Yeah.
And while he could only keep up marshalling the general population for so long without rebellion, it didn't end, as Thomas never ceased in his belief that the Federated Suns were poised to strike out at the Concordat at their first opportunity. Even as the Davians pulled troops from the border, leaving their own worlds without defenses, he refused to believe it was anything more than a ruse. It even got to the point where he believed that the clans themselves were a fabrication created by Hanstavian in order to dupe anyone who might have been foolish enough to believe it. He even passed this idea on to the Capellan ambassador to the Concordat. Sadly, this state of mental decline was exploited by the Capellans, where they would only support him in his delusions in order to foster better relations between the two states, at the cost of the Concordat, sadly. Tensions started to rise inside of the Concordat as powerful people began to coalesce around disaffected officers and elements of the TDF.
Here we go.
Even the military was finished with the agenda the Protector had been running for 20 years now. The central figure who became the rallying point that these people within the government and army followed was one Marshal Haji Doru. In 3055, members of the government, most prominently the Ministry of Trade and Colonization, stormed a meeting of the Protector and his Privy Council, demanding an end to civilian conscription for defense works, and also demanding an end to the Taurian defense forces being left on high alert so they could finally deal with the piracy issues now plaguing the outer reaches of the Concordat.
Black Wolf Paisley said hi again. Oh, okay. Yeah. Little babies usually do that. Black Wolf, I'm just saying. Yeah, imagine being this guy. Imagine being this guy here. Seriously, you're sitting there. You're panicking over everything. You're throwing a fit over everything. Will somebody please put this guy down so we can get somebody halfway competent in office? I'm just saying. Yeah, he does M01. He really does. But at the same time, come on, man. It doesn't make it, it just doesn't make any sense. I know. It's like the Mad King from Game of Thrones, honestly.
They also demanded an easing of trade restrictions, and that portions of the obscene military budget be earmarked to resume government-supported colonization programs, to restart the main engine of the Taurian economy. The address was delivered, by Assistant Minister of Resources, Erica Dryden.
Oh boy.
Not in our name will you continue conscription of civilians to build unneeded planetary defenses against an enemy that poses us no threat. Not in our name will you continue to keep the Taurian defense forces from engaging our real foes, the pirates and brigands that almost daily raid our worlds and despoil our cities. Not in our name will you continue to restrict trade that should profit the entire Concordat, in order to fill the coffers of a military that you will not permit to do its job in our defense.
There we go.
Not in our name will you continue to neglect the Concordat's best hope of prosperity, exploration of space and settlement of new colony worlds, which alone can truly strengthen and preserve our beloved nation. We demand the end to conscription, to bloated military budgets, to neglect of vital defense against pirates, and to neglect of colonization efforts. You are the protector. Fulfill your office, or resign it.
There you go.
Assistant Minister Erica Dryden.
There we go.
3055.
I like her.
In a blind rage, Thomas Calderon refused, to put
Of
it
course.
politely, and his minister threatened to appeal to the Court of Judicial Review in order to charge the Protector with violating the
No, this is Mad Eye Moody. This is Mad Eye Moody in Battletech. I'm just saying.
populace's rights and civil liberties. This was meaningfully the first time in Taurian history that this had been threatened. The abuse of power had gone on too long. Only Thomas himself was far too lost to see it. After the ministers departed his privy council, he ordered Marshal Doru to have the Taurian guards arrest them for treason. Instead, Doru refused
Yep.
and immediately informed the Protector that he was no longer fit to govern the Taurian Concordat.
Oh!
With the 2nd Battalion supporting him directly, Doru had the Protector taken into custody. After this, the Marshal approached the Calderon family, informing them what he had done, and pleading with Geoffrey Calderon to assume the throne.
There we
With
go.
the support of his mother and Janice, Geoffrey agreed to take up the crown. Several days later, only one day in fact after his 29th birthday, Geoffrey Calderon ascended to the throne of Taurus, with his only remaining sibling's full support.
Hey!
Janice, despite her condition, would remain an advisor to the new protector.
Good.
The people who he was responsible for cautiously felt that there was hope, that their long suffering was at an end. As for Marshal Doru, the man who had turned fate, he believed he could not remain in his position, as he had removed the head of state. Resigning his commission, Doru departed for the Inner Sphere. Thomas
Dude, imagine how bad you have to feel in order to sit there and go to the Inner Sphere from the Concordat.
Calderon died in early 3056, after suffering medical complications from a massive stroke.
Did he finally take the massive shit that was making him so paranoid? That is the main question we have. This is true, Hannibal. I was thinking about Stalin if you... Yeah. Maybe he got Comstarred.
You are the last person in the world I'd accuse of naivety. Or worse yet, double-dealing. Yet I have to ask, what are you thinking? Of all the Inner Sphere states to throw your lot with, you've chosen the least honorable and most duplicitous? And for what? A few fancy mechs and a little extra financing for our colonization program? Do you really value our own alliance and the Taurian contribution so little?
Oh boy.
Protector Geoffrey Calderon, in a message to Magistrix Emma Centrella.
Oh no.
Power certainly doesn't transfer consistently between one protector to another, in the sense of consistency of government. In the final years of Thomas Calderon's regime, his heir apparent had been already paving his own radically different path, politically, from his father. Not just out of a need for the Calderons to survive the transition, when it came sooner rather than later, but because the Concordat needed to deviate away from his father's ideas. And Geoffrey saw that clearly. In 3053 and 3054, Geoffrey had met privately with the magistrix Emma Centrella, where the openings for a much more cooperative arrangement between the two states, the magistracy of Canopus and Taurian Concordat, may have even moved to form an alliance.
Ooh.
Geoffrey had seen how the Capellans had tried to poison his father's behavior by supporting his worst instincts, all for their own gain,
Of
and viewed
course.
them as deeply insidious and untrustworthy. Going further, he believed House Liao to be a bigger threat to Taurus's rule than the mighty federated Commonwealth. Emma was receptive to the idea of an alliance, and one of the new protector's first acts, beyond reversing most of his father's horrid military spending blunders, was to announce his intention to form a formal alliance with Canopus. The public's reception was accepting to the idea, and thus, in 3056, Geoffrey Calderon signed the new treaty with their neighbor,
Yay!
which implied mutual defense, full diplomatic cooperation, cultural exchange, and a lowering of trade barriers, though the latter portion of this was notably staged over time. It also committed the two to begin sharing financial and technological resources, which boosted their new joint colonization efforts.
Hey!
Something the Calderon's Farlooker supporters were overjoyed with. The only problem was, the treaty was in truth a trap,
Yeah.
even if all parties didn't realize it. When it boosted both countries' economies, it helped the Canopian military and industrial complex more meaningfully, as the Taurians shared their experience, know-how, and technologies.
Hooray! One side always benefits more out of any diplomatic arrangement. Hey, Joe Rogan, thanks, bud. Hope you had a great vacation. I'm currently listening to your live stream while talking with Gork to flesh out some 40k theories. I have to make sure they are lore-friendly. Joe, be very cautious about Gork and Lork. They are fickle gods, my guy.
The Treaty of
Thank you,
Taurus
bud. I
also
appreciate
made
it.
both nations desirable partners to the Confederation, which from this point forwards would do everything it could to involve itself in the alliance,
Eh?
an attempt to subvert it towards
I know,
Capellan
Joe.
goals within the Inner Sphere, as Chancellor Liao Sun Tzu sought to restore the Confederation to its former glory. Emma Centrella's vanity and
Now, is this before or after they legitimately just handed over a whole bunch of worlds to the Federated Sons? I think this is before. Oh no, this is after. Sorry, this is after.
self-interest saw her become a willing ally of the Capellans, especially as problems began to emerge with the Marian hegemony. By 3058, they entered what was later dubbed the Trinity Alliance. Clearly from the onset having an implication that her other ally, the Taurians, should join in the new prosperity her nation now experienced, especially since her own armed forces were yet further enhanced with Capellan technology transfers and upgrades. Emma's plotting to drag her unwilling ally along with her would ultimately be a disaster for the Taurians. In late 3060, in order to try to mend the differences between the two allies, and in an attempt to persuade Geoffrey Calderon into the new Trinity Alliance, in the region between the two states which was now being actively colonized and governed, on the world of Detroit, the two leaders were to meet.
Nothing good can come out of Detroit.
This region had been in a chaotic state, with limited colonies and broken worlds since the reduction or collapse of the Oregon Reach. Detroit, in the new colony region, had a Capellan finance battlemech factory on it, making this the ideal place for the two to meet. Clearly, Emma intended to show off the benefits of joining the Trinity Alliance, all while marrying it to the colonial efforts the two states had embarked in together. Chancellor Sun Tzu was even slated to attend.
Yay!
A supposed assassination attempt on the Celestial Wisdom, however, derailed part of this planned meeting. Rather than waiting for the Capellans to recover so they could all meet together, Emma opted to meet with Jeffrey on Detroit alone, regardless.
Okay.
On Christmas Eve, 3060, new colony president Sherman Melton, along with his colonial marshals, took the two leaders hostage and proclaimed that the colonial region between the two states was now independent. A Capellan Canopian Special Task Force intervened 2 months later to end the hostage situation. And after several weeks of fighting, the situation did indeed come to an end, and so did Jeffrey Calderon. The Protector was killed in the final battle to liberate the two leaders, being caught in the crossfire. He had been the biggest obstacle to the Concordat joining the Alliance, so his death was beyond convenient for the Confederation.
Oh, wow. I wonder what might have happened here. I have no idea. I have not the faintest clue who could possibly have funded the kidnapping and have funded the fact that the one major obstacle to the Operation Meat Shield would have gone ahead. Oh, wow. I wonder what happened. Am I being sarcastic enough for you guys? Are you getting where I'm going with this?
And having saved Emma Centrella,
Look at this face. How can I not trust this face? How can I not trust this face at all? I'm just wondering.
she, her family, and her nation were now indebted to the Chancellor as well. This meant Sun Tzu could exert power over his primary ally to acquire the troops he desperately wanted. Everything, in the end, worked out in Lao Sun Tzu's favor.
Really?
But for House Calderon, Geoffrey's death was a mortal wound. Geoffrey himself had no direct, known heir, and his sister Janice had no ability to actually govern given her physical state. While there were other cadet branches of House Calderon, none were politically powerful enough or well-known enough
No, Sun Tzu,
to
I
fill the
don't.
void. Lord Grover Shraplin, the former governor of McLeod's Landing, a man who would go down in infamy in the history of the Taurian state and the Inner Sphere, emerged as the only figure with enough political power and expertise to claim the protectorship.
Oh boy.
And he was backed by Janice Calderon. At the time of assuming office, Shraplin was known for his patriotism, integrity, eloquence, and his intelligence. Disastrously, something that was overlooked by both the public and the elites was his clear disdain, mistrust, and paranoia of House Davian. Shraplin's ascension to the throne was not seen with much controversy, as the Taurians, outwardly, claimed to not necessarily have much loyalty to the idea of a Calderon always sitting on the throne. This is something, however, that was clearly not entirely true if we examine it with the lens of history. But for now, the Concordat's protector was not a descendant of Samantha Calderon. Only one other, brief time in the Concordat's existence had seen this. And unlike the brief tenure of Reina Arantino, this time, the line truly felt severed. The Calderons were a spent house.
This is bad. This is very bad.
For as soon as a king assumes an unjust and despotic power, he instantly becomes a tyrant, that which there can be nothing baser, fouler. No imaginable animal can be more detestable to gods or men, for though in form a man, he surpasses the most savage monsters in infernal cruelty. Who indeed can justly call him human, who admits not between himself and his fellow countrymen, between himself and the whole human race, any communication of justice, any association of kindness. But we shall find some fitter occasion of speaking of the evils of tyranny when the subject itself prompts us to declare against them, who, even in a state already liberated, have affected those despotic insolences. Marcus Tullius Cicero, Treatise on the Commonwealth.
This is gonna suck. The Ruinous.
In August of 3062, the new protector, Shraplin, began making his grand moves towards curbing his primary regional political enemies.
Okay.
Namely, and of course, the Davians.
Of course.
Publicly stating, with questionable evidence, that the separatists in the new
Watch the map.
colonies regions were supported by the Federated Commonwealth, and thus were responsible for the death of Geoffrey Calderon. The new protector signed on to the Trinity Alliance Pact, taking the Concordat into an uneven partnership with the Capellan Confederation. In his own near abroad, Grover reduced support for new colonization, and instead reoriented once more towards military efforts.
Yay!
Including punishing the new colonies and reasserting Taurian control.
Dude.
Public support for the new protector was strong, but even in these opening years, people began questioning just what their leadership and government were doing. Especially since it was commonly believed most of the catastrophes involving the Capellans were a part of plots formed by said nation.
Uh-huh.
More tragically, the Taurians, after being drawn into the diabolical pact with the Confederation, were informed that the treaty's mutual defense provisions meant that the TDF were forcefully requested to serve alongside the MAF in the infamous Chaos Marches, a region where House Leia was exploiting the chaos of the collapsed authority to regain their lost territories there. Even larger numbers of troops were drawn from Taurus when the
They're meat shields. Thank you, Joe. Avalon told me via Twitter to say hey to you and Ezzy. Hi, Avalon. Shame you couldn't make it tonight, but we'll be seeing you soon. Tell her thank you for me, Joe. Tell her hey. Oh, yeah, Yelwyn, this is rather annoying on a bunch of very practical levels. Because the sheer fact of the matter is, we all saw this coming. We all knew this was going to happen. You get somebody that's just pissed off enough at a particular group, they don't care how many of their own they sacrifice to take them out.
The Chancellor once again called upon his allies for the intensifying conflict with the St. Ives Compact. There was little to be gained for the Concordat spending blood and treasure in these wars, and the traditional rallying around the government in a time of crisis yielded little support in this instance, especially given the recent history of the Concordat. As the casualty reports started to flow in, protests started as a sizable section of the public was incensed by being drawn into a foreign war.
Right.
Multiple professional TDF soldiers gave up their commissions or flatly refused orders to head to the Capellans' multi-fronted campaigns. Individual Taurian worlds.
Like, for the first time, like, why? Why are we fighting for the Capellans? Can somebody please tell me this? There's nothing good about it.
Even became delinquent with tax revenues, deliberately not sending funds to Taurus in protest, or withholding military equipment and personnel transfers. This, however, was the minority point of view, at least early into these acts. But it was only to grow with time, especially as far more important crises emerged elsewhere. The new colony region, the one that Shraplin had vowed to punish and assert Tauran sovereignty over, was in every way made unmanageable by the Protector's actions. Colonies had less resources due to funding cuts, including less equipment for survival. The authority that was meant to be bolstered instead atrophied as the Taurian colonial marshals found their capital backing diminishing. Worse still, edicts were put out by Grover to find Davian operatives within their own ranks. All while new, loyal recruits were forced into the marshals.
Yay!
Administrative chaos reigned supreme as a result. In the early days of these policies, TDF troops had arrived in the area, enforcing martial law on these frontier worlds of the Concordat. which did compensate for some of the problems Grover had created
Avalon!
by utterly handicapping the Marshals. These soldiers couldn't stay long, however, due to the Capellan needs for bodies at the front, with the garrison shrinking or vanishing altogether by 3063.
This
Then, as a consequence, saw Canopus gaining more influence in the region, as their aid and economic influence continued to flow, especially as subtle and small changes were made to their own colonial policies. Canopus was now undermining the Taurians, their theoretical allies. Once new tax
You entered in an alliance with the Capellans. Backstabbing is just par for the course. The cat girls understood it, you didn't.
taxes were put on these colonies by Taurus to fund its military. The writing was on the wall. History does, after all, repeat itself. Even more critically, at home, while this was all happening, Shraplin did exactly what Thomas Calderon had done, by not only focusing too much spending on the military, but also by trying to dragoon more people into it.
Right.
Why? Because recruitment for the professional arm of the military collapsed. Because the Protector had failed to take into account that no one wanted to be flown over to St. Ives to die for the political ambitions of Chancellor Lao Sun Tzu, it turns out.
Oh, wow, really?
Before thinking of starting a large-scale call-up, however, incentives were offered to try to boost recruitment, including larger salaries and signing bonuses. A new marketing campaign was launched as well, once more to get more bodies into the army. Volunteers could now not keep up with the demands of the now voraciously hungry Taurian Defense Force's needs. And then, as if to compound all of this, the Federated Commonwealth descended into a full-blown civil war.
Oh, yay!
Now, the rational amongst you might imagine that this would be a comfort to the Concordat, given that it viewed House Davian as their mortal enemies. After all, it meant that said enemy was wasting resources fighting itself, rather than invading them.
Right.
This was, pitifully, not the case. Against all reason, it was believed by the Protector that whoever won the Civil War would keep their kingdom united, and would go on to cement the realm together once more by attacking a common enemy. Grover's belief was that common enemy would be the Taurian Concordat.
That's just dumb. That's just stupid. Like, I can give you one other faction that would be the logical choice for them both to attack. I mean, I can give you one. I can give you one, honestly. Sun Tzu, you stop it. You stop it. Just, no. No, Sun Tzu, I do not believe you, okay? In fact, X in chat to nuke that Capellan.
Certainly, it couldn't have been the Capellan Confederation. Or Clan
Yeah,
Falcon,
Karita, why not?
two much more prominent enemies of the great house of Steiner Davian. No, it would be the Concordat.
Oh!
So, following his thinking to its logical conclusion, Shraplin knew the state needed to prepare for war, and that meant depriving the new colonies of even more resources by the mid-3060s. Indeed, in 3065, he was actively refusing to even meet with the representatives from his state's own colonies altogether. The colonies filled with Taurian citizens, finally had enough of their protector's reign.
Yeah.
They had enough of his high taxes, lack of services, and lack of material assistance. They had enough of being treated as enemies by their own government. President Carver Trondell sent ambassadors to every great house, the new Star League, and Comstar, as well as the magistracy of Canopus, declaring the independence of the colonies, now officially giving itself the name, the Franc Reaches. In their declaration, they specifically singled out Shraplin and his lack of governance and neglect as the primary reasons for this necessary act.
Yay.
Whereas we, the people of the former New Colony region, wish to claim for ourselves and our posterity the blessings of liberty that all by right should enjoy. And whereas we, the people, have honestly attempted to secure those blessings within the laws and values of our mother nations. And whereas those attempts have failed through no fault of ours, but instead have foundered on the intransigence of others, most particularly Lord Grover Shraplin of the Taurian Concordat.
Imagine the founding document of your nation basically is there calling the leader of one of the former nations you were a part of a fucking dirtbag.
And whereas we, the people, do not consent to join pernicious foreign alliances, such as that with House Lao, in which both of our mother nations unfortunately chose to enmesh themselves. And whereas said foreign alliances have resulted in policies that violate the most cherished values of our mother nations, most particularly the equitable allocation of tax revenues to the detriment of the New Colony region, as well as our Taurian and Canopian brothers and sisters. Be it resolved, therefore, that the New Colony region from this day no longer exists. We, the citizens of the Franc Reaches, do declare our independence now and for all time. It is our fond hope that our mother nations will someday disentangle themselves from the concerns of foreign empires, so that we may restore our ties with them as friends and equals.
Nice.
Declaration presented on Taurus by Sierra Turner, Franc Reaches Ambassador to the Concordat, 28 February 3066.
This is something that you got to go in the mirror and think about if you're the leader of the Taurian Concordat at this point. You just got called a sellout. That's essentially what just happened to you. You got called a sellout.
After years of horrendous economic, internal, and colonial policy, and after self-destructive diplomatic catastrophes, finally the people of the now Franc Reaches had enough. The Taurian Concordat had become a doppelganger in many ways to the Terran Alliance, the very thing which Samantha Calderon and her people fled from 800 years prior. It was an out-of-touch, wasteful, neglectful regime that had driven away its own people. Only 2 years prior, the Concordat, with the help of their Capellan allies, had joined the new, short-lived Star League. Given that
I love the emphasis and sarcasm in allies.
the League's lifespan was very short, any prestige from this appointment was lost anyway, as the separation of the NCR was an international humiliation, rending much of their clout abroad and at home. More terrible still, the Canopians were having a small row with the Confederation, and had pulled their troops from Liao's wars by this time too, forcing the Taurians to pick up the slack in the Chaos Marches, even after the St. Ives issue had been resolved. With all of these issues finally piling up, citizens and elites began demanding the resignation of the Protector.
Yeah.
Some demanded an intervention in the Franc Reaches, to reclaim their now lost worlds, but there was no way to do so. The military was stretched too thin and was exhausted. Internally, Grover's approval rating crashed, and he was increasingly being isolated and blamed, rightly, for the misfortunes that were befalling the Concordat. The Protector would, and honestly should, have been ousted.
Yeah.
If anyone could have amassed enough political power to do so. But there were no real alternatives. The Taurian economic, class, and political system really did limit the growth of power outside of the central government, and as a consequence, With Shraplin still sitting on Taurus, his removal was extremely difficult, without all of the mechanisms of the system really rallying around a replacement. Though, more problematic for the embattled Protector, there was the potential emergence of someone who could replace him, with time. A bastard of Geoffrey Calderon, by one Talia Martins, a mercenary from Prey's division, emerged. A mere child and unable to rule, Eric Martins Calderon still represented a new threat to Shraplin's rule.
Oh boy.
Especially once one Baron Cham Kithrong publicly declared that he would be the boy's regent in 3063. Showing the rightful successor to the public was important, and what was more important still was showing just how much support this new heir had, even if it wasn't enough to overthrow the current governor. Because Baron Kithrong was the head of the TDF's 4th Corps, that meant any attempts made on the boy's life or vitality likely would have had a response. Some Taurian citizens even believed that Kithrong intended to try to coup the government at this point, or at least many hoped he would. But this was not to come to pass. Eric was only 10 years old at the time of his first appearance to the elites and the public.
Oh boy.
And Kithrong was uncertain on if he could marshal enough support from court and the broader government to
We all know what's about to happen. We all know what's about to transpire. I don't think anybody's going to be surprised by it.
embrace the overthrow of the deeply unpopular Shraplin. Just because the Protector had minimal support didn't mean that Eric Calderon had an endless font of it. He was, after all, a child, and honestly looked to be an illegitimate one. For Shraplin's part, much like the breakaway NCR, there just wasn't much he could do about the situation in the immediacy. The child posed a potentially significant risk to his leadership and rule, but not at that exact moment. The key and frustrating part of it, most assuredly, was that this figure emerged from the military, which was the most powerful institution in the country. He believed he still had time to right the ship and save his protectorship, and therefore, the Concordat. The amount of time that Grover had to achieve this, though, was not as great as he imagined.
That sucks.
Because while this debacle was unfolding within the Concordat, the Magistracy of Canopus had seized territory in the now former NCR, before recognizing the Franc Reaches officially.
The planet of shady sands?
Not only had the Franc Reaches just defied the Protector, and blamed him explicitly for their actions, they now delivered to the Canopians a rich world, and were recognized by everyone regionally of note who they would need to be legitimized. Kithrong by this point had been holding back for several years, and Eric Calderon was 13 years old. He had had enough, and demanded the resignation of Grover Shraplin in favor of a restored Calderon line. He would act, of course, as the head of the Regency Council until the boy came of age. If he refused, there was to be consequences. If for no other reason than his stubbornness to cling on to power at all costs, and with an excuse, namely, an incursion by a vicious mercenary unit, who had recently been underemployed from the Davians, promptly rejected the proposal and the threat. He believed he could withstand the need to step down, even as it was brought up with his Privy Council directly. In fact, he is quoted as saying, "I will not leave this realm in the hands of a general and a child while we're in the middle of a war."
A war that you got us into the middle of because you're too stupid to understand that you're being used by the Liao. I mean, read the writing on the wall. It's literally being broadcast via laser beams into the fucking mushroom clouds.
Even the now bedridden and severely ill Janice Calderon pleaded with him to step down. These pleas fell on deaf ears. The war he was referring to was an assault by the fighting Urukai, and it was a most vicious assault that they launched on the capital world at that. This travesty, too, had been entirely Grover Shraplin's fault. The mercenaries, namely said fighting Urukai, had sent representatives to Taurus in a single vessel, claiming to be looking for a contract with the Concordat.
Oh.
Shraplin, knowing the Uruks had previously been contracted by the Davians, was convinced they were acting as scouts for House Davian, and a secret invasion force would follow in their wake. Naturally,
That makes no sense. That makes no sense. Even if it's just the Taurian Concordat, if they did this to any power, they would be completely and totally like any time they would show up in a system, the obvious thought would be they are going to attack us every single time. This would be suicide. This would be just outright, complete and total self-destruction for any mercenary group. Any mercenary group. If they did that, it would be the end of them. This is stupid.
he had the Uruk ship blown out of the sky before considering any kind of meeting. The Urukai, it seems, did not take kindly to hearing that their representatives had been murdered, and that their ship had been blown up. They moved against Taurus in force. They arrived in system in August of 3066 and touched down on the planet shortly after. Whole regions of the capital were leveled in the fighting. Only direct intervention by the Taurian guards managed to end the Uruk's rampage, though at a heavy price in men and materials. Stubbornly holding in place and using the attack as leverage, the Protector managed to keep his death grip on power.
Oh my god.
But Baron Kithrong and a sizable portion of the public saw it for what it was. The Protector had invited reprisal from the Uruks by killing their representatives, something that foreshadowed much worse things to come. The entire debacle had been wholly avoidable, and the damage to property and loss of life were Shraplin's fault. But even with the people as split as they were, with some rallying around the Protector, and a larger body of the public being nervous and displeased with him, too many could find no one to rally around, as despite his grievous errors, Eric was still a child, and too few people were willing to trust the Concordat with a Regency Council.
A 5-year-old would have been better suited for this than this guy.
Of a boy they barely knew. Knowing he couldn't manifest a coup reliably, at least not without risking a full civil war, Kithrong did the next best thing he could, and made good on his threat to the Protector at the same time. He proclaimed the territories his soldiers were stationed on as being independent from the Taurian Concordat, and declared it to be the Calderon Protectorate. The response was immediate. The Franc Reaches, Detroit, and every other blow to the Taurian state's prestige, and Grover's, were left unanswered. But this betrayal was not. Declaring the rebels traitors, the dictator of the Concord ordered the TDF to assault this breakaway region, and to bring the enemies of the state to justice. Only, it failed. Utterly. Baron Kithrong had many friends in the TDF and government, and Grover, through his reckless policies, had very few. Officers refused their orders. Troop transfers and supplies were misdirected on purpose. Whole units of soldiers were convinced with ease to not attack their fellow citizens.
Really?
A civil war, a shooting war, loomed inside the Concordat, if the issue was further forced. The secession itself embodied the extreme level of what far too many within the army and citizenry felt about the regime themselves. While Shraplin still sat on Taurus, having his throne, and no one could take that from him at the moment, he nonetheless had no power over many of the disasters that followed in the wake of his foolish leadership. The new Protectorate, only a small number of worlds on the outskirts of the Concordat's frontier, for now, was to be a lingering, humiliating presence for the Protector, despite his best efforts.
Despite his best efforts?
The Calderon Protectorate goes its own way, for as long as events make it necessary. If other Concordat worlds want to join us, we'll welcome them, though we will not invade our sister worlds in the Protectorate's name. It's our hope that our late Protector's son will not only come to rule these planets, but will one day take his rightful place as the leader of the whole of the Concordat, should it have the luck to survive the troubles that currently beset it. Until that day, we remain committed to protecting and defending the last Calderon, and with him, the best hope for all the Taurian people. Marshal Cham Kithrong, in an interview with Newsmakers 3066.
Warpugs, this is a prime example of how blatant stupidity can run away from you, and how congratulations, you have managed to do something that not even the Star League could do when it was actively nuking worlds into glass, and that is fracture the Concordat, period. How did you manage to do that, you absolute ass clown? Unbelievable. How did he even manage to do that? How do you screw it up that badly? And it's about to get worse. Oh. Yeah, it's all a Davian plot, JR. Everything's a Davian plot. The fact that I'm stopping here right now is a Davian plot. The fact that I'm tired after being guys, I flew on a plane this big, okay? It was literally this big. And it was basically, oh my God, this guy's an idiot. How do you screw it up this bad? No, he doesn't have a Putin vibe, SD. He doesn't have a Putin vibe because nobody in the Concordat actually likes him. He doesn't have the actual everything. He's an idiot. Black Wolf, hey, put him to bed, bud. I hope they have a good sleep. I know, Gear Stark. That is exactly the vibe here. Guys, we're going to wrap up the Taurian Concordat on Battletech Tuesday next week. And I'm going to hate every bit of it. Because, my God, how do you get that stupid? He doesn't need more pictures of Davians. He needs to get himself some rest. He needs to get himself some rest. How did he do that? That was so bad. Guys, we're going to be checking out the end, hopefully not the end of the Taurian Concordat, okay? Next week on Battletech Tuesday. Thank you guys again. The vacation I went on was probably the best one I've had in my life. No, easily the best one I've had in my life, because it was a decade in the making and it was awesome all the way around. I'm getting back to regular, getting back to good. But until then, Warpugs, thank you so much for spending some time with me. I appreciate every single one of you. And I'll see you guys on Friday for shenanigans. Yeah, obviously epic, obviously. Warpugs, whatever you do the rest of this week, I hope you have a great week. And just know, old man's here for you. I'll catch you guys next time.